Without further ado, I would like to introduce our presenter for the day, Alex J. Lucier, talking about places as spaces.
Well, hello, that is me. I'm Alex J. Lucier. Before we get started, just want to mention if at any point, if you're going to be talking, I would like if you were to pipe in on something or have a question, start off at least with your name, pronouns, and then what department you're either representing or studying in. So that way I know more about the context of where you're coming from. But otherwise, let's get started. So the title of this is Places as Spaces, How Campus Can Help or Hurt Welcomeness, which of course I will explain more as we go along. But let's get started. So the agenda for this, at least, was starting with a line acknowledgement, start off with some introductions about myself and the topic, why I chose it, the foundations and frameworks behind what I'll be using moving forward, a couple of case studies we'll work through, some breakout activities, application to campus, and then we'll debrief questions and stuff like that at the end. So the land acknowledgement piece, I know at MSU we have one that we kind of use for many different events, but I've always had some issues with it, so I came up with my own. So a reminder, we currently live, work, and learn on the traditional homelands of the Oceti Sakowin, or the Seven Council Fires. More specifically, this land is the home of the Wahpekute, which was given up in session 289 as part of the 24 million acres and the two different 1851 treaties with the Dakota. The first term of those treaties was the peace and friendship existing between the United States and the Dakota or Sioux Indians shall be perpetual, which was broken when the United States government failed to provide payments and food as promised to the Dakota people. And that kind of sparked the US-Dakota War, whatever you want to call it. Thus, until all debts are paid, the genocide apologized for, Dakota students given equitable resources and access, and the Dakota people given unfettered ancestral rights to their homelands, our work will never be done. So, that's where I'm coming from. I've been reading a lot of work by Indigenous educators and authors who land acknowledgements are cool, but unless they come with action behind them, it's just words. So that's me. Picture of me. Well, you can already see me. My name is Alex J. Lucier. My pronouns are he, him, and his. Unless you're Ojibwe, then we can talk later. But if you're not Ojibwe, then he, him, his. So some background about myself. I wanted to at least put out a lot of this out there, so at least you know where I'm coming from. Personally, I'm from St. Paul. A couple fun facts about me: played clarinet for 12 years, and I'm fluent in 4 languages. Educational background: I'm currently a doctoral student in the Counselor Education and Supervision EDD program here on campus. I got my master's in counseling and student personnel, specifically the college student affairs track, and then I got my bachelor's in anthropology, specifically linguistic anthropology. All 3 of them were from MSU. This is my 11th school year at MSU. In terms of work background, I'm currently one of the research assistants in the Department of Counseling and Student Personnel, and I am currently also the graduate assistant for the Institutional Review Board. Lastly, positionality, my sociopolitical status, I identify as multiracial. My family comes from the Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa, and on my white side, Italian, French, Canadian, Scandinavian, basically Minnesotan plus Minnesotan. I'm a first-generation student, first in my family to attend college at all. I come from a low socioeconomic status. I identify as disabled. I do have moderate hearing loss, and I identify as a member of the LGBTQ plus community. So, why this topic? The dialogues that are happening nationally in terms of equity inclusion overall, but then we're talking about what types of spaces do we want to make for underrepresented and marginalized communities. You'll see conversations about what types of statues we should have at capitals, who has access to what, whose land is to whom, and things like that. So it kind of got me started thinking about it. I also took a class in evaluation, assessment, and stuff that include a lot of this, how space interacts with students. One thing that's kind of unique to looking at space is that it's a more physically viewable and tangible way of looking at outcomes when it comes to equity and inclusion, because welcomeness is hard to measure, but when you're talking about how often people use spaces, how they're set up, how students have edited the spaces themselves, you can see it, and so it's easier to measure. We're currently in the grips of a pandemic, so there are fewer students on campus, so if we're going to be making changes, moving stuff around, it's better when there's fewer students. Just no one gets in the way. Not that they're in the way, but if you're going to move a table, it's easier when people aren't sitting at it. And it's something we can all play a role. It's not specific to any one office or what type of position someone has. We all play a role because we all interact with the campus and the physical area. So by attending this, you should expect to learn how places become spaces, how space affects belongingness and those effects, how you can see it in action, and then ways to apply it to our campus. Just to kind of start out from the very basics, um, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, kind of for us to be human, for us to thrive, not only on campus, but in general, we have to be able to meet the very foundational basic needs. Physiologically, as long as we have air, food, water, and health, we can then move to the safety. As long as we have safety, we can move up to social, etc. And obviously, the goal we want for students is to hit the self actualization stage. But in order to do so, they have to have everything underneath it. So, as long as students don't feel like they have the love, belonging, and inclusion piece, they won't be able to build self esteem, power, control, recognition in order to become fully fledged, really thrive in the environment. Adding on to that, Strange and Banning, using the idea of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, also talk about the hierarchy of environmental design. Basically, with that safety and inclusion that's included in Maslow's hierarchy of needs for college students, you need that safety and inclusion before you can get involved. And once you can get involved, then you become part of the community. So the social piece, you can kind of pull it out to add to become part of this hierarchy of environmental design for kind of analyzing these type of things. In terms of the sense of belonging, as Maslow and Strange Banning were talking about, Strayhorn, who is known for work in belongingness on campus for students, talks about defining the sense of belonging as, in terms of college, sense of belonging refers to students' perceived social support on campus, a feeling or sensation of connectedness, and the experience of mattering or feeling cared about, accepted, respected, valued by, and important to the campus community or others on campus, such as faculty, staff, and peers. I highlighted this or underlined the perceived part because student perception is student reality. So if a student perceives that they feel welcome on campus, they're going to act as if they are welcome on campus. And if they perceive that they're not welcome, then they're going to act as if they're not welcome. I also underlined the mattering part because Nancy Schlossberg, who I want to one day grow up to look like, sitting on my couch, being a top theorist, sitting with a cool scarf and my dog. Schlossberg talked about marginality versus mattering. Marginality is the sense of not fitting in, can lead to self-consciousness, irritability, depression, can be temporary or permanent depending on which space on campus you walk into. You might feel like you don't fit in while you can fit into another one. The permanent one, the example that was given was multiracial or biracial students, because no matter where they go, they don't fit into one or the other perfectly like a monoracial person would in terms of like their personality development. So basically, a marginality, we don't want that. What we do want is the sense of mattering. Mattering comes in 5 stages or 5 phases, I think is what she used. Attention being the feeling that one is noticed, importance being the belief that one is cared about, ego extension, the feeling that someone else will be proud of what someone does or will sympathize with their failure. Dependence is the feeling of feeling needed, not that you have to rely on someone, but like you feel like, oh, if someone has an issue, they'll come to me. I'm actually needed for something. And then appreciation, the feeling that one matters overall. I really like this quote. The creation of environments that clearly indicate to all students that they matter will urge them to greater involvement. Clearly, institutions that focus on mattering and greater student involvement will be more successful in creating campuses where students are motivated to learn, where retention is high, and ultimately where their institutional loyalty for the short and long term future is ensured. Basically, I'm adding the concept of marginality and mattering because that kind of delves more deeply into the concept of belonging, because you can work on decreasing marginality and also increasing mattering. Like, what can you do to do those? So, I have a couple of questions that I'm posing to the group. Feel free to chime in, type in the chat, whatever. This is for MSU. What does campus currently do to give students a sense of belongingness? Who has some input?
I so I'm Liz Steinborn Gorley. My pronouns are she, hers, and I am the director of the Women's Center. I've been a part of the Welcome Week planning committee for several years, and I think that a big part of that entire event, now it's obviously manifested differently this August than in previous years, but a big part of that is helping students to view themselves as mavericks, whether that's through the rally where the fight song's playing and then kind of marching through and people are doing the clapping and welcome between the rally and lunch or walking through the arch. And some of those kind of rites of passage, I think, are some things that really are purposefully done to help students see themselves as a member of the campus community.
Yeah, especially when we're talking about traditions, those types of things on campus, you can see that, like, that's the Maverick spirit. I'm at MSU, etc. Yeah, very much. Thank you for your input.
Hi. I have a thought. So my name's Ginny Walters. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am the associate director of the honors program here. And I suspect that there are probably some issues with the spaces that I'm gonna think about, but I feel like those sort of lounge areas that we have around campus where students can go in between classes. We have one in here. I know the Multicultural Center has one. The Women's Center has kind of like that chill area. The LGBT Center has one. You know, sort of those spaces where people can kind of relax. I feel like when students are in that space, they're not quite home, but they have a sense of being sort of home. And I think they might feel like they belong in those spaces, and they tend to have fairly informal conversations in them. And I think that we just have a variety of those around campus. And so that's more of like a physical space, but that was the first thing that came to my mind.
Yeah, physical, but as we'll learn, it's not an accident. It's not that you put a couch in a place and all of a sudden students feel comfortable, maybe physically because there's a place to sit. But that's a very good point, and we'll delve more into that later on.
Yes, hi. Pakuli, she, her, hers pronouns. I serve as the interim director of Asian American Affairs within our Multicultural Center. I just wanted to add that working with 5 of our student organizations, or our student organizations in general, I think really do give students a sense of belongingness. They connect with peers that share similar interests, whether that's cultural background, academics, or just hobbies. I think that's another outlet of how students feel like they belong on campus.
Yeah, I know the Young Asian Gamers Association. I'm a member of their Discord, and it's been popping off lately since people play games together. Among Us and Genshin seem to be the most popular currently.
And it kind of works during this pandemic.
Exactly, and it's a way, even though we're not physically on campus right now, it's a way for students to have like a virtual space, especially if they're working with people or playing with people they know. Then they can still build that sense of community, don't feel like they have to defend their existence to anyone because they know the people they're playing with. So I'm glad you brought that up. Next question, though: in what ways can a student feel marginalized on campus? Remember, marginalization is that feeling of sense of not fitting in, maybe something that may cause them to feel self-conscious, irritable, depressed. Does anyone know of any instances or anything of that sort?
David Gardner, director of the LGBT Center, he, him, his pronouns. I think students, when not all entrances to all academic buildings or buildings on campus are equally accessible. And so I think that could be one area where students feel marginalized around campus.
Yes, very much so. If someone needs to have a power door and there isn't one nearby, what message does that convey, especially if they're trying to get to class or work or something on time, and it's the only entrance or something like that? That can really convey a message of you don't belong because it's not built in that way. That's a great example.
I think about not seeing, like, students not seeing themselves represented in a space. So given that we're a predominantly white institution in Southwest, or like South Central Minnesota, I think that there's a lot of opportunities for students to come into a space and not be sure if it's for them. And so just by, lack of attention to detail. So when the signs, the artwork, for instance, in the Women's Center has been predominantly white, and there's been some purposefulness in making sure that it's more broadly representative of different ethnicities, different races, different religions. So I'm just thinking about kind of how a student feels moving into a space and if they feel like they have permission to be there.
Yeah, I like the way you phrase that, of that feeling of, am I allowed here? Because I don't see examples of people who look like me. So how do I know that I belong here if there isn't physical or even verbal acknowledgement. Because if there's a staff member who's there, yes, they can introduce the space. But what if there isn't a staff person sitting in whatever center at that given moment? Yeah, that belongingness can shift as well. So that in the chat, we have Pat Nelson, who said the posting on bulletin boards around campus can be marginalizing. But true, yes, if the postings are only directed towards specific populations, kind of along the same lines as Liz was talking, or right, if the events are only advertised in specific areas but not all over campus, that can send a message too. If you're only posting them in one academic building, students who are in different academic buildings maybe don't hear about it, and then it's like, well, why didn't no one tell me about this event? But similar to along the same lines as what Liz was saying, if they're not seeing those postings, just like not seeing the artwork or saying you belong, it can be harder to feel that way. Last question for this part. In what ways can you help a student to matter on campus? Sammy in the chat says invite them to campus events. That's a simple way. And I would add to invite to events that, like, if you know the students' hobbies or preferences of what types of things they like to do, that's even more helpful. If you bring it up as like, oh, I remember you said you like to play video games. I saw this like game event happening. Have you heard about it? And that might convey the message of not only do I remember you and am I aware and appreciative of your uniqueness, here's a physical way to attend. Thinking of another example just off the top of my head, if you're an advisor, either academic or like a support coach type advising, fit in one of those roles, just contacting the student when you haven't heard them in a while is another way. Obviously, you don't want to go breaking your back messaging every single student if you have like a workload or caseload of 150 students. But I mean, sometimes you can sense that like maybe the student isn't happy, so I'm just going to send a quick email saying, hey, I was thinking of you. Something as little as that. So moving on, I kind of talked briefly about belonging and marginalizing and mattering and things like that. Since Strayhorn and folks have talked about it, there's been a couple more developments that have made the concepts a little more inclusive. First one of the articles that I read by Slayton and colleagues, the sense of belonging is linked to students' experiences of stress and focus on academic work. So if a student feels like they don't belong, it may negatively affect just how they experience campus, but also their GPA might not be as high, or they're more likely to do negatively and not have a good outcome in a class. They also talked about 4 themes that came up when talking about belonging. Feeling valued by others in a group setting is one way to feel like they belong. Having sustaining, meaningful personal relationships, again, with academic advisors can be one of those relationships, peers, friends, etc. Being aware of campus culture can affect sense of belonging. As Liz was saying, we are in a South Central Minnesotan four-year university. If someone is not aware of what that might mean, it can negatively affect their perception of campus. Or if it's less diverse than they had hoped, that can negatively affect belonging. And then feeling supported by the university environment, having advising, having check-ins, having spaces where they can feel safe, etc. Samura does a lot of work on this topic, so if you're ever interested more about the role of space and belongingness, definitely look up her works. They're in the references at the end. But she talks about belonging being a dynamic and fluid process. Someone may feel like they belong in one space and then later that same day feel like they don't belong, or one specific experience can completely turn on its head how they feel about the campus, whether that's like a racist incident or being called a slur, something like that can easily just change in a heartbeat. Also, a lot of the previous research on it kind of talks about like, well, you set up this space and students will feel belonging, but Samura also talks about how students have that agency. They play a role in their own belonging, whether that's shifting spaces to fit their own needs. That, and then college students' social identities interact with the physical and social aspects of campus spaces. They don't just sit there physically, do some stuff, and then feel like they belong. So she has this model that she uses where students' expectations of a space in campus along with their experiences in that space can help form and add to that sense of belonging, both academically and socially. Belonging is kind of like a spectrum. So if a student has high belonging and they're comfortable, that's great. If they're feeling low belonging or have a low sense of belonging, then they either remake themselves, reposition themselves or remake the space itself as different ways of increasing their sense of belonging. And so that remake space is kind of where I want to focus more on this. But it is important also to recognize that the sense of belonging is not one size fits all. Students from different cultural groups, and by cultural I mean more like socio-political or areas of marginalization versus just like racial, ethnic, different culture groups experience belongingness in many different ways. So kind of a quick list. Privileged students, when they talk about campus spaces, tend to use positive words to describe it: comfortable, fun. While on the other hand, racially or ethnically minoritized students describe campus spaces with a lack of structural or equitable diversity, whether that means like, I don't see a staff person in this center who looks like me. I don't have a single professor who is of the same background as myself. Will be more likely to talk about that before they talk about the positives. Students who come from minoritized religions tend to speak on space to practice their faith, or like flexibility. For example, if a student is a Muslim and they have a call to prayer that happens during class, if the professor is willing to be flexible and let them step out for 5 minutes to do that so they can come back and not have to worry about it, then they count that as a positive. For LGBTQ plus students, surrounding areas, as if like, it depends on like, so Mankato's kind of known for being a little bit more LGBT friendly than other areas of Minnesota. It's not perfect, but at least the city of Mankato, as long as that fits into the needs so they feel like they can be a part of the community, there's more positives to that. Another piece being religious persecution. When you have preachers come to campus and students perceive that they're getting some sort of special treatment, or that what they're saying is negative, that can interplay with that. Students with disabilities talk a lot about accessible structures and more flexibility with professors. Accessible structures meaning like accessible doors. If there are no power doors, then it's like it can mess with that sense of belonging, feel marginalized. International students, language support, culture shock support. I know MSU has a really vibrant international community, and the International Center does a really great job at fostering those types of things. Student veterans, as long as they get their benefits sorted out and it's not like a super complicated process. And flexibility, again, I know I've learned in classes how student veterans who have been in combat situations will tend to sit in seats in a back corner facing out or facing toward the middle of a classroom because they don't want anyone being behind them that can surprise them. And so if they're given that opportunity, then they feel much more comfortable. And then first generation students, depth of explanation, not assuming, as in information isn't left out or assume that they'll know that. I'm in a doctoral program, and sometimes it's like, am I supposed to know how to fill out forms? Is my advisor supposed to help me with this? And if they're clear in explaining that from the get-go and also checking in, it can help with that sense of belonging. So to kind of put into practice a little bit what I've been talking, first we're going to do a couple of case studies. These ones will be as a bigger group, so feel free to chime in, chat, or camera if you have anything to add or anything comes to mind. So there's 2 of them. I'll explain the first one. We'll discuss a little bit. We'll go to the second one, discuss, and then we'll move on from there. But this is kind of just to put into practice what I've been talking about. So the first one, Cassandra is a student with disabilities who attends a Northeastern university that prides itself on its history, both in its existence and its authentic buildings. So it's been around for a long time. The buildings are like, they look cathedral style almost. And so the university is super proud of that. She studies journalism, wanting to tell the stories of other people with disabilities and their contributions to society. So far, she's enjoyed taking classes in her major and getting to know the equipment and theories she would use for projects. Her professors have been very accommodating as well. However, as a graduation requirement, every student at this university has to take a seminar on world literature. Because everyone must take it at some point, the class is offered in sections of 100 students. The only room that can fit that many students is the auditorium, which is built in the 1800s. The auditorium only has stairs leading down to the front, and Cassandra is a wheelchair user. So what I want to do with the case study is kind of talk about what things help Cassandra to feel like she matters on campus. On the other end, what types of things marginalize, and then what that might do for her sense of belongingness on campus. So what are people's initial thoughts? Lindsay in the chat says the campus should move the class to another room or split it into smaller sections to be more accessible to all. Yep. Pat says the accessibility limitations in the classroom with no clear solution to ensure she can be where she wants to be. Yes, because she likes her other classes, the ones that are in smaller groups related to her major, but like this one gen ed that everyone has to do physically cannot get into. So what might that do to how she feels about campus? Yeah, Ginny says someone might propose an elevator as a solution, but that still singles her out or makes her feel marginalized. Right. If this were something to happen at MSU, what could we do? What are some solutions here besides the elevator solution? That's one. But as Jenny pointed out, that's not ideal. If you're thinking, gee, that's kind of tough. How do you change a building? How do you get substantial change, significant change? That's kind of the point. It's really difficult to do that. Sometimes there isn't one solution that can fix the entire thing. Holly says in the chat, do we start with asking her? That's a very good first step. Actually checking in on her, asking what's happening. Lindsay says split the class into several sections, giving more time options. Yep. You can change the room to multiple rooms without singling anyone out. Right. Now what happens if there's only a certain number of faculty who can teach this course? And so the 100-student section is the only way of teaching it. What if? Yeah, exactly. Like there can be so many different variables in this. Moving it online, everyone has to take it. If there's 100 students, probably isn't all students sharing something with each class session. So online could be an option, but then you also have to consider, do all students have equitable access to internet and a device to get to the internet? Provide a way for students. Sammy says providing a way for students to access the class materials. Substitution, but even a substitution means that she wouldn't be getting the same opportunity as the other students. Ginny, dare I suggest a flex sync option? Too real. But yes, I mean, there's different solutions, but as was brought up, starting by asking her how she feels or what she feels would be a great solution is probably the best first step. But yeah, I mean, I'm not saying any of these are bad solutions, but literally every single step, every single change would then have a different way of changing it. There's not one universal solution besides like rebuilding the building or something. But then the university wouldn't want to do that because it's a historical building, or you can build a new building on campus, but that's really expensive. The options are endless, but you got to give some, take some for those. So I'm going to move on to the second case study, which may be a little easier because it doesn't involve like having to get a bonding bill from the state to get a solution. Minjun is an international student from South Korea studying full-time at a prestigious West Coast university. Very specific, West Coast University. The university has a highly rated international office and a robust international student population. Although he has been studying English since elementary school, he has not had many opportunities to practice it before coming to the United States. He passed the TOEFL with flying colors. The TOEFL is the English proficiency test that a lot of students take in order to get into different universities in the United States. While he can understand what other people are saying quite well, he does have a perceivable accent. While taking a course in his major, engineering, he notices his professor talking to him in a different way than his peers. That is, the professor's tone shifts, becomes higher pitched, like he's talking to a child. Now, Minjun understands the professor completely, but finds the content of the course itself tougher than other courses. Despite explaining his difficulty in this specific class, the professor tells him his issue is his English, and that he should see a tutor and then retake the course. How might Minjun feel mattered, marginalized, belong in this type of situation? Pam says the professor isn't listening to him. If the professor doesn't listen to you at all, obviously, you're not going to be happy. But part of it is Minjun's been enjoying his time at the university. He's been enjoying his classes. It fits with very much. Sammy says, I feel like this might make him feel marginalized because the professor isn't taking his opinion into account, right? And it's even demeaning his skills. Like, he understands what the professor's saying. He's not having an issue with that. The issue is that this course is just really tough, and sometimes I just don't understand what's happening. Yes, he is learning in a different language, but he has enough of a skill to not, that won't be the barrier. The professor's making assumptions about his English, Pat says, possibly his capability, exactly. And so that can convey to Minjun, like, this will be something that'll always be an issue. You don't belong because you don't speak English. as a native speaker. Like there can be so many different messages that can be conveyed from such a simple interaction. But yeah, even too, like seeing a tutor and retaking a course, especially if you're at a West Coast university, probably not the most cost-effective option. What will that do to his GPA?
I think part of the problem here too is that the professor has no concern that they're the issue. And so like that's been decided mentally for this instructor. And I think that the hard part now is that it would hopefully Minjun, who's enjoying his time at the institution, has a relationship built with someone they can turn to say, this is not my English, this is an issue, and I need some help, to advocate to that instructor to help educate a little bit. You know, this student has a complete grasp of English. That's not the issue. And do a little bit of course correction on implicit bias and explicit bias.
Yeah, I remember you're familiar with those because you gave the presentation last year on bias. So yeah, it's that also kind of begs the question, well, what happens if this professor is the only one who teaches this class? Or like it's a 300-400 level class where kind of have to, there's all those. Jenny says, I hope Minjun has a good advisor to talk to. This might be a really awkward situation for Minjun to handle on his own because of the power dynamic that inherently exists between the professor and the student. I would hope that an advisor would step into the situation and speak with the professor or coach Minjun through doing so if Minjun feels comfortable with it. That, I think, sounds like a doable plan, depending on how comfortable Minjun is with it. So I appreciate all the input people have had, just kind of get people thinking about how to like apply some of this stuff. So for the next part, we're going to actually get into spaces themselves and how they can affect campus, kind of what the goal of what this presentation was on. So from structures to spaces, spaces are meaningful to individuals to which they attach a sense of belonging. So rather than just a room being a room, because they've attached meaning to it, they've attached a sense of belonging to that space, that's what turns it into a space. So campuses are comprised of buildings, landmarks, greenery areas. There are physical structures. We don't just sit outside and talk on the lawn. We have classrooms, we have student unions, libraries, etc. Layouts are carefully planned. You don't just say there's an open space, let's put a building there. There's a lot of cohesion, a lot of planning has to go into it, bonding bills to be able to afford it. Like universities can't just throw up structures or build a room because you can just add to a building. Like you have to carefully proportion out space and layout and stuff like that, including buildings, shapes, architecture. Outdoor areas are even carefully placed. I know if and when Armstrong Hall comes down, the expanded CSU Mall will have more meaning to it. Interims and areas, of course. And this is from the Lu and Fu. They talk about spaces on campus for students to be able to recharge. And so they talk about waterfront spaces, vegetation spaces, courtyard spaces, square spaces. MSU has the CSU Mall that has that with a fountain, greenery spaces. Even if you go behind Armstrong Hall toward Trafton, there's green space there, and those are also carefully planned. But on the other hand, space is not neutral. A building is not just a building. Once people start to put meaning to it, it loses its neutrality, because depending on who has made claim to that space, who has started to develop it, who owns the space, can add almost like a political meaning to it. Space affects how people interact, and people's interaction shapes spaces. What makes the Mav Ave is because the tables are there for people to move around. They're great for like eating. They're not huge tables that you would use in a classroom. They're specific like food court tables and seating. And then because people eat there, that makes it the Mav Ave. Now, if people were spreading out throughout the whole building and were eating in other spaces, what does that mean in terms of how big is the Mav Ave? Do you specifically delineate that? These are all things that have to go into the consideration about what makes a space. Samura, again, as I mentioned in a different article, talked about spatial cues and change of space. So if you were to move a space around, people are still going to use it the way that they were before. So you have to add more cues into it to show that it's changed and how it should be, or how it's planned to be used differently. So if the Mav Ave were to be expanded, I mean, it was renovated previously. And so for the first, after the renovation was complete, people kind of were a little awkward of like, well, do I sit over here now that this space is new? Or do I just sit where I normally sat the entire time? Renovations do a lot of that. So sometimes people put up signage, classroom layouts too, that usually dictates, like, you can have two classrooms next to each other. The rooms themselves are identical, but one has round tables with 8 seats around it. One has desks that have the foldable and are all facing one direction. So whoever set up the layouts for those spaces kind of dictated already how those spaces are going to be used. So it's awkward if there was a round table with 8 seats and you were to pull all the chairs out to face forward, just as awkward as it would be if you took the 8 of the foldable table chairs and faced them toward each other. It just feels awkward, and so people are compelled to use them as they're set up. Research shows more variety can facilitate better comfort. So space like the Mavav, if you have tables that seat 4 people, tables that seat 1 person, that way someone who is eating alone doesn't feel compelled to take up a whole table that can hold up to 4 people. And then people don't have to move stuff around just to get what they need. So providing different variety in a space can just have people feel more comfortable. And that also is true in like lounge spaces, different centers. You can't just have 25 chairs that are exactly the same and then expect students to use how they want. It's good to have a mix of couches, of rolling chairs, stationary chairs, kind of like, so I'm thinking of like the Multicultural Center Oasis and the space in between the two, how students will move them around. They have the comfortable chairs outside. It's a little more quiet in the hallway than it is inside the center sometimes. So having that variety is really helpful. I really like this quote from Carvalho. Universities were never designed for everyone. And this gets into the history of higher education in the United States. Structures, including buildings and universities that weren't built more recently, were built for a small minority of the population, specifically male, white economic elites. Some of the older universities, especially on the East Coast, kind of in case study 1 with Cassandra, are basically copy and pasted from European universities. So Oxford, these types of building types you'll see in New England, Ivy League. It shows a sense of prestigiousness, but that's because when they were built, universities were for richer white men to be able to hold on to that status. They were explicit in keeping out other people. The shape of the campus, so like Oxford and some older ones, if you look at the shape of campus, even MSU to an extent, because they're a little older, there is danger of outsiders. So like England has had invaders, wartime has broken out, and so by having that like square walled off area, it's easier to keep people protected, but it also conveys the same message of, if you don't belong here, don't enter the doors, don't enter the external space. And so when that happens, racism is considered a permanent feature to it. And so it begs the question of like, well, then what's the point? Are we trying to fit people who a structure space is not built for? Are we just trying to push them into a space and then hoping that they thrive just as well as the people who were historically in that space? And so McCall and Castles talk about how centers that are not centers too, centers catered to minoritized populations do help, and they do serve as safer spaces, but it also can signal that that institution doesn't have the same level of inclusion for students who come from that population. Like, we wouldn't need a center for XYZ if XYZ students were woven into the fabric of the institution from the get-go. Great to have centers, students feel better, but it's like, where's that balance of how welcome people are? So then how do we then edit structures to be truly universally accessible? This isn't a question I'm posing for an answer, but kind of just to keep in mind. So then there comes the conflict of space. Jenny says, there's the part I knew was coming when you pointed out the bad part of center concepts. Right, as you talked about earlier in the presentation. Centers are important to have, but then we'll get more into it too at the breakout parts. Then there comes when there's conflict of space, when you're talking about things like tradition versus sensitivity. As I had mentioned, structures and areas and parts of campus were constructed when it was more exclusive. And so you really have to think about what types of messages universities are trying to convey. So when we talk about traditions, when we talk about Welcome Week, like Liz was talking about, there's those social markers of tradition. What is the mascot? What type of artwork do you display? What types of landmarks are on campus? Actions, as in, like, I know I go to MSU hockey games, and when the opposing team lets a puck through and people shout "Civ" at them, that's a traditional action that people do at hockey games. That gets at odds when we talk about sensitivity for new in quotes, because that's not who the structures were built for, get added into there with underrepresented populations. So that's when questions come up of when the mascots are race-based, when you have artwork or statues that commemorate folks that are at odds with the beliefs of an underrepresented group. Land ownership, going back to my land acknowledgement of like, whose land are you on? And then in terms of actions, one of the sources is a Strange and Banning book that we use for class, talks about how a university changed their mascot, but then they still did like Dixie chants and waved Confederate flags at football games. So it still was talking to students of like, yes, we changed the mascot, but we're not, like, how far does the university go to enforce that those get changed? So these are kind of questions. Where is the balance where you maintain the tradition, but at what cost to students who might be negatively affected? And then if you do make changes, at what cost does that come to the tradition? So I was going to do breakout rooms, but I think the group here is small enough now where we don't have to do a breakout room. I just want people to chime in. So what we're going to do is we're going to quickly design a new space. Now, without thinking about budget, without thinking about building space, we're going to build a new center, a new space on campus. We've gotten permission. We're going to pretend that we can plop it wherever we want. We don't have to worry about what's there or whatever. So these are kind of the questions we want to ponder while we're doing this. What population are we hoping to serve? Who is included and who is excluded? Where on campus would the center be? What building? What area? Next to or near another center? Why are we going to put it there? What does the space look like structurally? What do the walls look like? Does it have windows? What do those windows look like? What types of floors? What types of doors, etc.? How would the space be set up? What types of furniture? Usable elements, technology, things like computers and the like. What goes into planning those? What types of cultural elements? Again, culture as in not just race or ethnicity, but just in general artwork. What types of phrasing? I know some centers and offices will put like words, stickers on the walls and things like that. How much of the university's imagery are you going to put into it? Are you going to have a giant stomper on the wall? Who staffs this place? What types of expertise would that ideally have? If it's going to be a center for a marginalized community, how much experience does that person have working with students from the marginalized community? How do you attract students to the space in the first place? When it opens, how are we going to tell students come visit and that they'll be safe there? What types of norms would be established and how are they enforced? If there are any types of rules or things to expect, how would we enforce them? I'm trying to think, because how I originally envisioned this is we're going to go into breakout rooms for a few minutes, and then people could take notes, discuss. We'll move on from the first part because there's a second part to it that I want people to think more about, and that's examining an existing space. So wherever office you currently work in or study in, etc., if you're a student, framing those questions now of like, so what population are you currently serving? Who is included and who is excluded? So if you're going to be talking to a supervisor or something like that in the future, and you're thinking about why aren't students coming? Well, who is included and excluded and why? Oops. Where on campus is your space and is it an ideal location? If you can move this space somewhere else and you think students would be more involved, why would it be better there? What does the space currently look like? What do the walls, windows, floors, doors, etc. look like? How is your space currently set up? What types of cultural elements are you currently showcasing? Who is currently staffing it, and do they have the expertise to be most effective? I'm not saying anyone in a certain center actually is like ineffective, but I did some readings about LGBT centers and how a lot of times at universities, people, and this goes for ethnic and cultural spaces as well, or racial spaces as well, where they'll just hire someone from the community who doesn't have the level of training that you would have at a different center. That's not at MSU. That's just in the literature. So do you have that ideal expertise from the staffing? How are you currently attracting students? How do they belong? How do they know that they belong? And then what sorts of norms are established? Any thoughts from these last two slides? I know that was a lot, but yeah, Megan.
Yeah, I just think this is a very interesting concept, especially since we're in a pandemic and how we are required to utilize space to keep that safety piece also at the forefront of our minds has definitely impacted how the space is utilized and interpreted by students now. So I'm just going to talk about the Multicultural Center, not just because you've mentioned that a couple times, but also that's where I work in the Multicultural Center. And so, the space has really been revamped over the last few years to really be a inclusive and warm and welcoming space than it was back when it was first founded. And so the space is open to anyone. Anyone is welcome to come and be a part of what's happening in the Multicultural Center on any given day. I would infer that some students from different backgrounds might feel more or less welcome there. I don't know. But I think, you can, and then that ebbs and flows on any given day as well too. So, but, the space was really designed to be a multifunctional, multi-purpose, welcoming center for students to kind of come, be there, engage. All of us as directors for the Multicultural Center and our various diverse groups work in that space. Our offices are in that space. So we technically staff the space, but also we have student workers that help maintain the space as well. So that was like the pre-COVID space that we were working with. And I was part of the return to learn group that reset up that Multicultural Center space to adhere to the new COVID safety guidelines. And the way that space is formatted now has just a much different purpose than its original intention. And I just think it's very interesting to think about how limiting that space is now because of that, like you can only have 9 people in that space safely. That's it. And that includes people in offices, and that's not what it used to look like. So I think that's kind of what's going through my head as we're thinking about the space. As I read through this, I'm thinking about how it used to be in the Multicultural Center, not how it currently is, but it is currently just a completely different space and sends a different message.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And even thinking about it too, because it's currently it's in its COVID form, what happens when we're not in lockdown anymore? Is it going to go back to exactly how it was pre-COVID? What types of things have you noticed, or what kinds of questions like these could you have of thinking how should we reset it up? Is this accessible for everyone? While you were talking, I also thought about, because you'd said some people may feel left out or included based on ebbs and flows. If there's an event going for one culture group happening, do people from other cultures who are multicultural feel welcome at that time? Keeping in mind that balance. Yeah, the Multicultural Center is one of those really interesting ones of there's so many different groups that are represented that it's hard to have full representation at all times, because you can't have so there's the 4 main racial breakdowns. You can't have a quarter of the center at one point be used for this group, a quarter used at this
It's kind of, well, I mean, that's the cool thing I think about the Multicultural Center too, is it has some ebbs and flows to it in terms of who's using the space and when it's being used and what that, if you were to percentage break down it, who's in the space at that given time.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's probably some interesting, that's definitely a doctoral project if you were thinking about it, but
I've already got 3 ideas.
I know. But I think your point is, I do think, I think that's super unique to our space as well. So
Yeah.
I've thought a lot about this for the Women's Center and the Violence Awareness Response Program being together, and we're in a spot that is completely detached from any other service office, right? The nearest door on our left gets into the booth of the theater of the theater, and the nearest door to the right gets you into the scheduling office. And so what that's provided, right, is a little bit of anonymity for students seeking advocacy in the Violence Awareness Response Program. They're not worried they're going to have to run into someone who they may be discussing in a very confidential setting with Laura. So I think about that, but as far as location, I hate where we are. I feel super detached from like, we aren't in a traffic flow. We are off of the footpath. And while I understand, first of all, where space comes from is it exists, and then people are kind of shuffled around. Like the original Women's Center was down across from like Herbert's and Gerbert's in the little nook now where people can sit for dinner, or where there's like meal space. But just thinking about, I think it'd be marvelous if all of the division of diversity and inclusion could be in, like, we could have a whole wing together, like with a couple of, meeting spaces where people can gather maybe a little bit more in their affinity group, if that's what they're looking for, but like a larger space where you can kind of do some of these bigger programs. And so that we can kind of serve more broadly students multiple dimensions of identity. I think also accessibility resources, LGBT center, I also appreciate, again, like some students don't want to walk past a bunch of people to get to some of our offices. And so that's kind of the piece to navigate. Like, how do you maintain people's right to privacy? So it's like the counseling center being across from the MCC or right next to student government. Are those students less likely to go to counseling because someone might see them walk in, that they're commonly, so anyway, that's a big jumble, but those are a lot of things that I think about related to spaces.
Yeah, I mean, because I remember conversations years ago about like, well, why don't we have like a diversity wing? And I know one of the issues with that is, well, then you're kind of all the diversity is in one area, so if you want to ignore the diversity, you can just ignore that area. And so it's nice to have it, but as you were saying, it's hard to then make those connections. You can't just pop across the hall to ask a question of a coworker when you have to walk half a mile almost to another center, it feels like sometimes.
Today I would take the mile, like I'm so lonely. But yes, when we're all back on campus.
Yes. I know, is it the U of M that did or does, I forgot, where their like multicultural areas are kind of condensed into one area, but theirs are more like RSOs than centers for that. But then there was the fight over space because then you had students who weren't represented, like white folks, and students who then complained because they didn't get their own center. This conversation makes me have such a love-hate relationship with our current space. What do you mean by that?
I'm not sure what I mean by that. That's why I just put it as a really vague comment in the chat.
Understandable.
What do I like about our space? I like our location. I shouldn't say that. I have a love-hate relationship with our location. We are on the second floor of Morris Hall. We are very much in a traffic flow area. Like Liz, you were talking about that with your space. We are along the campus tour route, which I think is nice for us. I feel like every office should be on the campus tour route. At the same time, we are in an interior office in an academic building. So for a student who's not familiar with campus, it is difficult for them to find us. Sometimes we have big windows in the front of our office, kind of similar to a lot of your all spaces. So I think that's nice. Like, I do think that makes it seem sort of inviting, those big windows, because you can see into the space. At the same time, the individuals who sit in that kind of welcoming area, and this includes me, we're mostly white women. So if you're not a white woman, you don't often see yourself reflected in that space. I love our furniture. You can move all of our furniture. Everything is on wheels. So if you want to move it to, if there's students out there who want to work on a group project, it's really easy for them to move stuff. Of course, you can't move anything right now because it's COVID and everything is spaced exactly 6 feet apart. So you can't do that right now. But on a normal day, you can do that. I think of all these sort of spaces as like mini student unions, kind of, right? They're places where students can, sometimes it's quiet so they can study, right? But sometimes it's loud if they're hanging out and getting a little rambunctious. So I like parts of our space, but there are aspects of our space that I'm realizing from this conversation that are not are not necessarily as great as they could be.
It's good you're thinking about that. That was the point. If even one person left this thinking, how is the setup
Yeah. Thanks,
not being
Alex.
as inclusive?
Thank you.
And it's okay to be torn by it, of like, well, I've enjoyed this for so many years and I never realized that this might be excluding students that I hadn't thought of. That's
Well,
perfectly fine.
I think it brings up like the point that I think you were kind of getting at earlier, Alex, is, these spaces, we've just kind of been assigned them. They weren't really built for the purpose that we're looking for them to be. And so, if you could wave your magic wand, like you were saying before, if there wasn't any, physical or budgetary, restrictions, I'm sure all of our spaces would look a lot differently. And it's kind of that mentality, is you do the best you can with what you've got to make the space, as welcoming and open and inclusive as possible. And I know there's bits you're not going to get all of it all in one space, but hopefully you can get little bits of it here and there too. So
Mm-hmm. And then ideally, if you were to make it so that we didn't need separate spaces, that everyone felt welcome on campus, the student union was just one big space where everyone just felt comfortable, what would that even look like? That's, yeah.
Sure.
Add
So I
something.
will talk about this from a department standpoint instead of just a centered standpoint, because we probably have one of the most confusing department offices ever. We're on the first floor in Morris Hall, and it's the Department of Government, Department of Gender, Women's Studies, and the Department of Ethnic Studies all together, which is kind of contradictory. It took a fight for us for almost 2 years to be able to get our office managers set up so they had accessible desks for somebody who had limited mobility. We have one conference room we share among the 3 departments and no student space. And being in Morris Hall, College of Business has done a great job of branding the open spaces. So everybody thinks the 2 student gathering spaces are just for College of Business, as I'm sure Ginny would agree with. So we don't have a spot for our students. So even if they wanted to hang out, there's nowhere for them to do that. And I was on the Armstrong Hall steering committee for the design, and that was one thing we really stressed, is that students need to have a spot where they can gather, because you can't rely on department offices to have that spot. And if you don't give them a space outside of the CSU to gather, they're not going to gather, and they won't feel welcome. So I know it's really confusing. I really wish we had a spot our students could just hang out, but they don't.
Yeah, I know I've studied on the first floor in that space, but because it's right outside the COB office, it was like, should I be here? But then one of my friends I was studying with was a business major, so then it was like, okay, now I can be here. And then 2, the Crossroads, I actually have taken a nap on those couches before, and it was really awkward because, there are a lot of people, a lot of high traffic, as Jenny was saying, but like, it was like, are these napping couches? Are people using this? I'm lucky in that because I'm hard of hearing, the noise is not a big deal. I'm okay with it. But it was just like, you also have to remember, students, if you're given the opportunity to nap somewhere, will nap there. Women's Center used to be my favorite napping space. With the old couches, when they got changed, I was sad. Or I've napped in the basement of the library. Then that also begs the question of like, how welcome do I feel like I belong enough where I can nap wherever I want.
Well, and the ownership part, like Jenny just mentioned, is they don't own that space. It is for everybody. But the Crossroads is also a really good example of a pinch point where accessibility can get really compromised. Because when it is really busy right there on the second floor at the Crossroads and people are doing group projects, you can barely walk through there, let alone if somebody needed more space to walk through there.
I went back to the slide because it talks about the spatial cues. Signage is important. If you have a giant College of Business sign over an area, they're probably going to think it's a College of Business area. And I know, too, Morris Hall, when giving tours, people will say, well, this is the College of Business area, because you see the tickers in the classrooms on the second floor, and everything, like the classroom layouts, feels very businessy. Yeah, but again, like, you kind of, if you're given an office because you have the space for it. Who was it? I think it was when Professor Fawn was retiring. We were in that office, the Government Ethnic Studies office, and it was weird because we had to like find spaces to sit so we could eat cake because there was nowhere to sit in there. Jenny says the Crossroad area is a really nice example as well. I think there's a weird, not the best academic word, de facto ownership of spaces on the campus. Students don't know if they're allowed to be in certain places. And don't get me started on the chair placement. They're literally in the hallway. Yeah, it's like the taller ones that are almost like bar seating type. Are you talking about?
Yep. Yep. And students sit there, right, because they can, and they'll like eat there or whatever. But you know, people don't push their chairs in because they're like, oh crap, it's like 2:59. I have class, and then the chair's like literally in the hallway, and you're like, okay, well, I hope nobody in a wheelchair comes through because
or pushing a cart or something.
I'm not sure what would happen. I would hope that they would just like scream into our office and be like, move this chair. But they shouldn't have to do that.
Yeah.
Pat knows what I'm talking about.
Well, that makes me think of a picture that was floating around recently on social media of a gentleman who was in a wheelchair, and he was trying to go down the path to the store, and the pathway was just littered with carts. He couldn't get through. And it was, was a kind of a critical comment about people not returning their carts to the cart return. But that's exactly kind of that point of like, what happens when the space isn't utilized to that safety point and to be more accessible. So that's what it made me think of when you're talking about that too.
And how do you enforce it? Do you have security folks walk by and tell people push in their chairs? Like, how do you effectively do that? Like, whose job is it? Do you have to put up a sign that says, please push your chair back in? And then what message does that convey of like, you're putting up signs that they're not attractive signs. It's not a welcoming sign. It's a, hey kids, don't go back to kindergarten and learn to push your chair, and that kind of messaging. But yeah.
I think that's a great point too, that like signage and messaging. Because so I was on maternity leave and came back, and so Laura and I had this great idea. We were going to be more eco-friendly in the Women's Center, and we were going to have cups only that people could wash. Now it's COVID, and that just like gives me an asthma attack. But that we would have cups that people would reuse, and they would wash it and bring it back. Well, then apparently that wasn't happening, because I came back and there were signs everywhere that was like, clean up after yourselves, house elves don't work here. And I was like, oh no, like, no, that's not on brand. Like, we need to, if it's a problem, get rid of the cups, like you kind of remove some of those pieces. I know that too, when I first started in the center, there was a lot of seats because we wanted a lot of people in the space, but that was making it super difficult to maneuver through that space. Like, it was tight. It was tight without a bag and with, full mobility. And so that was something too, where it's like, we're going to lose seating, but we want to make sure that the people who can access the space, or like that the people who want to access the space can access the space. But I think that's a good point. And to the napping point, I know that I was like somebody who was like, I know that in our division, generally, we're not encouraging students to nap in our areas because we want it to be like a place for study. But I also recognize in some cases, we have students who this is like a warm, dry space to sleep. Also, college students love naps. But like, are we, it's like when they put those horrible things on benches that make it so that homeless people can't nap on them. Like, if we say no naps allowed or whatever, like, are we really, if a student needs to rest so badly, why aren't we, able to afford that opportunity?
I just remembered, I hated when they replaced the couches in front of the CSU ballroom because they have the arms are wooden, because I used to really like those puffy couches, but I guess it's part of the brand of like, you don't want visitors coming when there's a big event and there's random students sleeping. But like, I pay tuition, some of the visitors don't. So I mean, it is what it is. I really like this conversation as it's going, but in the interest of time, I'm going to go to the last couple of slides so that we can wrap it up. And these are specific to MSU. Back, was it like 3 years ago, fall semester or spring semester? I forgot. The campus did a climate survey. And so one of the questions that I ask people a lot and talk about a lot is, there was one part, I can't find the full report anymore. I never saved it, and the website now is all discombobulated. I can find the 1-page report version, but I can't find the full 100-something page one. But one of them, there was like a heat map where students could click on campus where they felt most safe and where they felt the least safe. And so there were 3 areas in the least safe category that were the hottest on the hot spot point. For anyone who knows, don't spoil it, but for people who haven't read that part, what 3 areas on campus do you think students reported feeling the least safe?
Did this include parking lots?
Yes, parking lots was one of them. Yes, especially for women and at night, because there's not security roaming some of the parking lots and stuff. I'll just say the other 2 areas, Wigley Administration Building, and then the area near financial aid, the cashier's office, and what was Wells Fargo, were considered the top 3 least safe spaces on campus. Not like, I think the gym was also considered more for comfort of like, I don't want to shower around people type, but like, what message does it send when students feel the least safe in the administration building, the financial aid office area? What can we infer from this information? I mean, also people don't tend to go to those offices unless they have a need for it or they're having an issue. I don't know very many people who want to hang out in the financial aid office, so that's understandable. But then what types of spatial changes can we suggest to make students feel at least comfortable, safe, secure in those areas? Again, in terms of time, the other one, assessment. Does your department explicitly measure its inclusion and belongingness on its yearly reports? If so, how are you measuring it? And if not, how can you measure it? So that I want people to kind of think about that when leaving this. Kind of wrapping everything else up. If anyone has any questions, wants to chat a little more, my email is there, so you can send me an email if you think about something or if you want some advice from a doctoral student who who read some books and articles. Yeah, feel free to reach me. Yeah, any last thoughts, debriefing, any types of questions? Thank you, Lindsay and David. Thank you for attending. It's a little different when people think about diversity. They're thinking of like increasing their own cultural competency. So this was an area I felt a little bit iffier about because it's not talked about as much. But that also is part of the reason why I wanted to talk about it. And the Lincoln statue, I'm also very publicly against having that. But what message does it convey? Does it help with student belongingness when you have Native students, high school students walking past asking why that's there?
Thank you all for joining us and for your time today. We really appreciate it. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank y'all.